Mark Pacini, welcome to the Game Informer Show, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, man, we talked to you a long time ago on the Arkham Origins cover story trip because you're up there showing Blackgate.
Yeah, that was almost 3 years ago now.
Does it feel like a lifetime ago for you?
Now it is. Now being at the end of ReCore, it seems like a lifetime ago. Yeah.
Okay, ReCore's felt like a long project for you?
Well, it's been, for our studio, it's probably our largest original title that we've done, obviously with Microsoft and Concept. And it's those new IP games are sometimes really difficult to put together, and you're on them for a really long time. And when you get to the end of it, like we're at now, it seems like a lifetime ago when you actually started. So it's kind of good to pick our heads up finally and be like, wow, this is what daylight looks like. So.
Is it just a matter of pre-production taking forever, or is it just iterating systems and gameplay thoughts? And how does that work?
Well, I think that normally, when you're trying to make something new, you do spend a lot of time coming up with whatever the basic idea is and the basic game mechanics, and that could take a really long time. I mean, it might not seem like a long time, but when you're working on something for over a year and you're just playing a very brittle prototype that has some essence of fun in it, it takes a really long time to get to that point, because we're dealing with it's not just a game about, simple mechanics or, something that you can mock up together really quickly. It has a story, there's an adventure, there's a world. There's a lot you need to do to just get to the basics of the game working. So even that point, while we're getting the technology and everything working, you're working on the story, you're working on the characters, and what's going to make this game special, and how can this game be identifiable on its own? Like, we think it's really important that you take a screenshot of the game and people right away will know, oh, that's ReCore, or that's whatever game. That's really important. So that takes a long time to just understand where you are before you kick it into gear and actually start making everything. So that usually can take a year or longer just to get to that point.
Jesus. So at the end of that game's project and the whole work on it, like, how are you feeling about it at this point?
I'm feeling really good. I mean, we're at the point where I feel we've made a game that kind of shows what we can do as a studio. It's really challenging to make a game like this, just in general, but also working with our partners in Concept and with Microsoft, and just external. We've had partners in France and partners in Canada, so it's a very true distributed development situation that we went through, which was really cool because our studio is really small. The number of people from Armature that worked on ReCore relatively to this size of game is pretty small, and it really caused us to change as a studio a little bit about how we communicate to other developers and how we communicate with a publisher like Microsoft. So it was really interesting for us because we made it through all that. I think that a lot of the times the coming into a project where you're dealing with, for example, Concept, who's a Japanese developer, there's a communication barrier that you have to break through before you can productively, really start working on the meat of the game. And we already kind of had that shorthand. We had worked with them previously on a different project. So that was kind of actually the lowest risk out of everything. It was actually dealing with and creating this relationship with Microsoft, and how, what are their motivations for what they want to have for their games and what is important to them. And, when does this project need to ship, and how does it fit within their library? And then getting all these really great creatives from their side, like Joseph Staten, for example, helping us with story, and a lot of other developers that really came in and added a ton of value to the game in terms of, just elevating it. So that was a whole learning curve for us as a studio. And at the tail end of it, it was a bumpy road for a little bit in the beginning, just learning all that. Not only are you trying to make something interesting and cool and something that you feel, as a gamer you'd like to play, you're also dealing with relationships and different sensibilities and fortunately, right in the beginning, a lot of that, we're all on the same page. And but it did take a while to get to the point. There's always a point in the game where you say, wow, this is actually fun. This is a lot of times for the most part in game development, you're playing the worst game ever, and you're playing it for the longest time ever, because it's just broken. It's just the way it goes. You're building something, and it's not very fun. And we found the fun in ReCore about 3 or 4 months ago. Right around E3, when we were getting all the E3 stuff ready, and all the game was together. Like long form games, like I'll say similar to like a Metroid. This isn't exactly like a Metroid game, or even like a Mega Man game. They're kind of long form experiences, so you really can't get what the game's about in 5 minutes. It's kind of, you need to have everything together and go to different places, and you're crafting and you're doing different things. And once that all comes together, which is a long, arduous process, you could finally sit down and be like, am I having fun, with this? Is this what we expected it to be? Because it's all together. And when you start hearing internally, because a lot of times people are tired, people are grumpy, people want to kind of be done. They're like, yeah. We've worked on this, we really like it, but we want to kind of finish. But when you're hearing, especially in these last 3-4 weeks, other developers that, like artists and animators, things like that, who don't play the game itself all the time, are coming up to you and say, wow, this is actually fun. This is really fun. And you're hearing it from a kind of an unbiased standpoint, because if anybody's not going to like it, it's probably going to be somebody who's worked on it for so long, And so when you start hearing those things internally, you're like, that's great. We've been able to achieve something that people are finding are fun. And you're not going to please everybody, obviously, but I think that more so than anything, that's important to us, is that people enjoy what they're making, and that when they're right toward the end and they're really tired and they're trying to get this thing out the door, when they're playing it and they're having fun, that's really great for me to hear that.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you talk about like the challenge of communication across studios and Microsoft and all the like sister developers, because it seems like you guys would be specialists in communications at this point, especially like working with Japan. Like you worked on like the Metal Gear Solid ports for Vita. You're going to be working on Bloodstained. You've worked with Inafune before. It seems like that's Armature's specialty, is tricky communication, especially with the ports that you guys have done. I'm sure that's a lot of navigating relationships.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a couple different parts to it, really, because in dealing with, for example, Inafune-san, and we're going to be dealing with the Bloodstained group, and we've dealt with Nintendo before. It's a different type of communication, because you are talking, for the most part, you're talking about creative ideas. You're talking about the arguments are about what's fun, what are people going to understand, what's going to be innovative, what can we do that's different. That's a whole different type of communication, and it's really hard to do that in Japanese, because I don't speak Japanese. I wish I did, but when you're communicating these ideas back and forth from English to Japanese, abstract thought is really hard to translate in Japanese. So it's kind of ways that we've been able to understand how to communicate, like with images and drawings, and just being able to have a sense of what they're trying to communicate to you, rather than being so literal. There's a lot of literal things of, we'd like to, imagine a building and it has 15 floors and you do whatever. And if your first hang up is, well, we can't build 15 floors, you're asking the wrong question. It's about like, all right, what are you trying to do with these 15 floors? What's the gameplay you're trying to achieve? And then usually we adjust it to something of like that we can do, and that maybe relates more to the game we're really trying to make. So that's one kind of side of it, is understanding the intent of the creative thought of how the design and what we're trying to do with the game. The other part that was really challenging is organizational structure of how different companies work together. This game was worked on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for almost the past year, because we had partners, like I said, we had partners in France, we had partners in Seattle, we had partners in Canada. So the communication of understanding different time zones there's a lot of Skype meetings that have to be had. There's a lot of how we do triage for bugs and what things we do work on and don't, what's important. We have a lot of creative people and a lot of business people kind of communicating at the same time. So that was really challenging. It wasn't that, and again, it wasn't like it was a bad thing. It was just a new thing that we had to deal with. And it really was kind of devoid of almost the creative side, because the creative side actually went really well between all parties. It's that business structure, organization, and communication standpoint that's always a challenge when you're working with a lot of different groups in a lot of different places all over the world.
Yeah, you mentioned ReCore. It's nice to have a game that can kind of show what Armature can do. Do you feel like you guys have been pushing and maybe struggling to find like that studio defining game? Because you've been around for a while now.
Yeah, yeah. Honestly, it's been really tough. Partly, uh, basically, we own everything. In terms of good, bad, and different, whatever games we've put out, we own that as a studio. And we've had a lot of unfortunate timing in the game industry. Like for example, when we started, it was 2008, and about 6 months after that, the economy crashed, and a lot of developers went by the waysides because of funding, and mobile gaming became really popular, and it was really cheap, and people were doing it out of the back of their houses, and it was like two man setups, and it's really hard to compete with that because you really can't. It's really hard to fund the studio with mobile games. It just is, and so we had some fortunate steps, like with working with Inafune-san's group. We worked with Electronic Arts. We worked with a lot of different people, but the timing was always bad, and so that caused us to have an up and down with an opportunity. We had a lot of people interested in working with us, but the opportunities never kind of came to fruition.
So just a lot of starts and stops, that type of thing.
A lot of starts and stops, and we were really lucky to be able to continue on through that. Doing being able to maintain our studio. We've grown over time. We've relied some on ports. Ports are a good thing to keep the lights on, and it gets people experience developing games, which is great, especially on different platforms. And it also grows relationships with publishers, because they might come to you for another opportunity, whether it's port, creative, what have you. So we kind of fell victim a little bit. Again, I'm proud of everything we've done here, but like Blackgate, for instance, wasn't exactly the game we wanted to make in terms of time. We probably needed another 4 to 5 months on that game,
and even that would be quick as hell.
Yeah, and I mean, all in all, we built that game from the ground up in a little over 10 months. So when you're in that position where you're kind of fighting for your next meal, sometimes you agree to timelines that you normally wouldn't. You know what I mean? So we have a really great relationship with the Warner people, and we still do work for them. And we were fortunate to get that project that really helped us. But it was the sort of thing of like, was that game at that time the thing that would really define us as a studio?
Mm-hmm.
It didn't seem like it. It was the thing that got us a lot of experience and continued forward. And with games like, we just put out Dead Star earlier this year, and with ReCore, we feel like these are the types of games we want to, continue making. And out of everything, obviously, ReCore feels like it has the best shot at maybe reaching an audience. And we're in it to make good games and have really great relationships and enjoy what we're doing. And this felt a lot like the first Metroid game, is that it was a real struggle. And sometimes when it's a struggle, it could be a good struggle and a bad struggle, and I think with, the original Metroid, we were struggling because of not only time, but like we all gaming eyes were on us to screw up. Right. Everybody, it's like, as a developer, it's really hard right now, the way some media talks about games and like the No Man's Sky stuff that's going on right now. And it's like, it's super disappointing as a developer, because we're part of that community. Like, I don't want to say we're making games for the community, but we're making games to contribute something. Like we want to make things, and this is kind of what we're offering. And it's really disappointing to see that. And I honestly don't think the first Metroid would have been made in today's climate. Honestly, it's like because we had so much negative attitudes toward us when Retro originally was told, hey, you're going to do Metroid. And then it was announced, and then everybody went in the wrong direction of like, oh my God, US guy, blah, 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 blah. I can't even imagine what that would be like now.
I think you know
And
exactly what it's like. It's the Federation Force teams. I mean,
yeah,
they went through this
exactly. And I
exact
mean,
thing.
it's you know, Tanabe-san was kind of like my mentor at Retro, and he was directing that game, and immediately, whatever opinions are about the game, that's for people to figure out what they feel about it. But I think that a lot of times it's unduly negative because of people's expectations. It's really hard to satiate that, and it is what it is. People are passionate about gaming, and that's cool. But sometimes they don't understand the effect it has on the people making it. You know what I mean? And it was really difficult. Like I was younger, a lot younger, doing Metro One, so I didn't give a shit. I didn't care. Sorry if I
No, no,
cursed,
no, go for it.
but I didn't care. I was young enough and dumb enough to think that we can pull it off, as a studio. And a lot of younger developers have that. They have that attitude, like I believe in what we're making and we're going to do it good, bad, and different. And that you need people like that. And you know the amount of negativity that surrounded when we first showed Metroid to, like, I guess it was the E3 after that, like when we first showed gameplay, people's attitudes changed, which was great. But still, there was a big delay because the internet wasn't the internet, but now it was still a lot of magazines. There was a big delay when people's attitudes would go out, and there weren't there were message boards and stuff, but it wasn't like today. So I think the climate's really different, and I really feel very like angry when I see stuff happening like with No Man's Sky and whatever. It's super unfortunate because those guys busted their ass to make something different, and it's got caught up in this climate. So it's kind of like, I think that you have to look at it in that atmosphere as well, because people are a lot more critical. Video games are like a legitimate thing now in terms of like, it's a legitimate career. It's not a black box that people get into the game industry somehow. This is a legitimate career, business that makes a lot of money. So there's a lot of critical eyes on it, and there should be. It's like any sort of media. So the times have definitely changed, and I felt some of that, like with ReCore. Just in terms of, there's a lot of expectation. Again, it's to mitigate your expectations of like, ReCore isn't as big a game as Metroid, isn't as big budget a game as Metroid, but there was a lot of pressure. Inafune-san got caught up in the whole Mighty Number 9 thing. And now that's kind of, everybody's like, ooh, what's going to happen with ReCore? It's almost like, it's a good story. So I hope we pull it out, and I hope people like ReCore, because Inafune-san's group deserves that.
Yeah, and to cut that storyline off and to make it a continuing trend of like, oh, Inafune-san, since he left Capcom, it's completely different now.
It's unfortunate because it's got, like, people are going to make their own stories, right? Because obviously we can't say a lot about what internally goes on in game development just because of business secrets, or not secrets, but private business dealings. And I think that's kind of the unfortunate nature, is that it becomes a story that shouldn't be a story. It's like the whole Mighty Number 9 thing. It's going to have a relationship to ReCore somehow, but I think hopefully in a positive way, because Inafune-san's group had a lot of great influences on the game, and the collaboration was really awesome. So yeah, I'm looking forward to people checking it out.
Yeah, it doesn't take much to shift people's minds. Like, thinking back to like the negativity when Metroid Prime was first announced, it's like, Metroid is sacred. It is this holy, just superb like mood and atmosphere, and we cannot let a Western team touch it. Retro knocks it out of the park a couple times, and then it's like, okay, only Retro's allowed to touch it. And it's like, next level games, don't go near it, you asshats. You're gonna blow it. And then Federation Force comes out. There's some defenders out there of the game. It doesn't take much for people to just expand their circle of what's allowed.
Exactly. And I think that sometimes people forget that there's actually human beings doing these things. That and it really does affect people personally. And I think that it's one of those things that hopefully will continue to, like everything matures, right? And hopefully the audience and media and everything like continues to mature like it is, and not not become tabloidy.
Well, do you think it's tougher to take those body shots of releasing games that fans either have different expectations for or just don't meet those expectations, or to kind of sit in the dark like you guys were for a couple years there, just having projects start and then get canceled because of bad timing? I mean, imagine that was really tough as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's when it comes to us personally as a studio, it's one of those things where we've done and generated a lot of things over the years, and we've been around since 2008, so over 8 years now, and we've we've generated a lot of things, usually a lot of them ports, unfortunately, but like there's a lot of opportunities out there, but the climate of the industry, things change from day to day, week to week, as far as what publishers' plans are, how games fit into their portfolios, and a lot of games, good, bad, and different, get canceled because it just isn't relevant anymore to what people are trying to do for their brand or for their company. So I think as far as with Armature goes, is we've had some unfortunate things happen in terms of games that were really promising getting canceled because plans change, and that's the way it happens. So right now, things are going well for us in terms of being able to start on original projects and take them through to fruition and publish them is like huge for us now, and our goal is to continue that trend.
Yeah. So what do you think is the biggest learning period of your career? Is it working at Retro starting out? Is it founding Armature? Is it the tough years, or now actually getting some stuff on the ground?
Well, I think that the toughest things for me are I'm I'm very pessimistic in terms of like myself or things that I do, and I think that's because I always want to try to do better, and I think that I always focus on the negative things because that's my job. Is I focus on what's wrong with something and try to improve it, right? And I think that if you don't get out of your own head, that could be a problem. So I think that in general for me, that just the media thing is probably the biggest one, right? I think that's probably the one that like Blackgate was a big one in terms of like the first time we really got negative press for a game, and it wasn't that the game was bad. It's just that I don't think people wanted a non Rocksteady Batman, and I think that's part of what I mean. Even the Montreal group got crucified for that. So it's kind of like people voted with their money, right, and with their opinions. So that was a tough one, and that's just a personal thing. But I think that growing as a professional is really it's funny. I remember the first meeting with Nintendo, and we sat down with Miyamoto. And we were going to Miyamoto-san. We were going to show him the game, what we were working on, and at this point, we worked on the game without Nintendo at all. And we went through this whole thing, and we talked about whatever. And at the end of it, my boss at the time says, "Wow, they're really upset at you." And I said, "Well, why?" He said, like, "You didn't have a pencil and paper in a meeting." Like because I didn't have a pencil and paper in front of me, they felt like I wasn't listening. You know what I mean? And that's like a very newbie mistake, right? You show up to a meeting and you're not like writing stuff down. So all those things, like instead of being super embarrassed, I'm like, well, that's never going to happen again. All those things. And that's kind of how, at least my philosophy, and I know we do that a lot here, is that it's okay to make mistakes, but just don't make them again. Just like keep growing from that. And I think sometimes in the industry, people are kind of like comfortable that you'll have a lot of veterans who are comfortable in their job and don't improve. They kind of plateau and keep making the same mistakes. And I think that's what we try to do and try to encourage in people. And it's a tough thing to do because it's habitual for people to do, is that continue improving, continue getting better. So I think that's kind of some milestones for me is to continue to do that. And I think that there's two game experience, like building games, that have been probably the toughest. The first is Metroid. The first Metroid was probably the toughest, hands down, game development I've ever been involved in terms of getting that thing completed. And I think it was just the amount of stuff we were trying to do in the time we were doing it. And then the second was very much echoed in ReCore. ReCore was very difficult, not that it was difficult in the relationships. It was just difficult because there was, we're doing new technology with new partners, all this new distributed development, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of hours to do so. People end up putting a lot of hours into ReCore in terms of development. So it takes a toll on people making it, and it affects you in different ways. So I think that ReCore echoes the first Metroid in a lot of ways with regards to how it affects you physically. And I'm getting older.
So How the hell did you guys do that with Metroid Prime One? How do you make that tight of a game amidst the chaos of trying to accomplish so much?
It just took a long, it took a lot of effort by a lot of people. I think that um, a lot of it was, some of it's luck. You're always going to be lucky in a case that things turn out well. The other is that at that time, because with Retro, they kind of went through a lot of iterations of developers. And when the studio eventually went down to just making one game, which is Metroid, we had all the best people from all the teams that were kind of there. So you're looking at maybe a team that never would have existed before, that had all these incredibly senior people that already knew how to do a lot of the game development. So it in that way, it was kind of, again, we were lucky with that in that regard. But again, I think it was. Uh, I mean, I don't know. I can't explain it in terms of how, like, there was nothing that we're going to make this and this is going to be amazing. It was more like we were making a game and making the decisions that we thought would make the game better. And then Nintendo would always come in with these really cool ideas. And we ended up creating a relationship between the two studios that worked.
It's really interesting that you said that, like, you were working on it for a while before Nintendo checked in on you and Miyamoto came knocking at the door. Why do you think that was? Did they want to just give you time to experiment? Did they just not see Metroid as a premier license at that point? Or what was the logic behind it?
No, it had nothing to do with that. I think it was just the way the studio was set up, and at that particular time, there wasn't a lot of communication with Nintendo Japan. Gotcha. And there was a certain point which that happened.
How much of Metroid Prime's success do you think was just this natural balance between Eastern design philosophies and Western design philosophies, and maybe even how much do you think there's a difference between those two?
Well, for certain, it wouldn't have been the same game. I think it would have been a very different game if it was either way. And I think that's what, in any cases, like even with ReCore and other games that we've done with Japanese developers, is that usually a lot of times ideas come out of left field of something that, well, why would we even do that? That makes no sense of why we would that, or your immediate reaction is that doesn't sound very interesting or fun. But in a lot of cases, when you kind of peel back their intention of what they're saying, it's something like, well, I actually never thought of that, and that's something new. It's something new that may not work in exactly the way they're saying it, but if you take it, and I think this is a big part of maybe what made those games successful in terms of the development, is that we really took an honest look at it. Because a lot of times if you're in a meeting with somebody and you don't like their idea, and they're saying, I would like you to do this, and you're like, okay, that sounds fine, and then you're like, this is a really horrible idea, I'm not doing this. You don't give it the due diligence. You don't really look at it and say, if I was really going to do this, how would I do it? And I think that people sometimes are very dismissive of that because, hey, I have my own creative agenda. I want to make this. I feel this is the way it is going to be done, and then they miss out on an opportunity. And so I think that's one of the things that made it successful, is that even if it was a harebrained idea, and at the end of the day, maybe if it didn't work, that's fine. But we did the due diligence on it, and we looked at it and said, honestly, if I had to ship this, what would I do with it? And a lot of people would be asking this themselves. And that's when you come out with the really cool ideas, is that if you're pushing yourself to get out of your comfort zone. And that's, I think, a lot of what Metroid was. And I know at that time we were talking about, like, first-person adventure. And, like, first-person adventures are nothing new now. You have basically a lot of first-person walking around and looking at stuff games.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be about shooting or action necessarily to be compelling. And I think that's when we latched onto that also motivated a lot of our decisions on what was going to define the game.
And was that idea coming from Japan then, or what were some of those Japanese ideas that made you kind of reframe the way you're looking at the game?
Well, honestly, the biggest one was the visor, because, and we've talked about this before, is that originally when we were talking about the what Samus would be able to do in the game world, we had visors in the game, but we didn't really expand too much on them. It was like, oh, you have your thermal visor and you have your X-ray visor and stuff like that. And it wasn't like, oh, you have these, like, oh, this is going to be expected, this is going to be cool. We could do something different with it. But it seemed like such a silly idea of like, oh, this is going to be, Nintendo's thing was like, this is going to be about the scan visor. This game is about scanning the environment. And we're like, okay, but this is like an action game. This is like a shooting game. But it's the brilliance of the and it was Tsunabe-san that basically was like, he had an idea of like, oh, well, what if we did this? And you can get information. This is how we do the tutorials, and this is how you give the players instruction. And we could do all these things with the scan visor. And because their motivation was, this is a game about the scan visor, and ours was not that at all. But we did the due diligence and integrated it in a way that felt natural to the game. And like, how would we want to do this? How would we do this? So that's how it went back and forth. And that was like a really great suggestion on their part, because it seems so simple now and it seems so rote now. But at the time, there weren't a lot of games like this.
Do you ever daydream about what that game would look like if it was just a retro title? If Nintendo just slapped their name on it at the end?
Yeah, well, I know what it would look like. It would not have been anywhere near as good. I mean, why I feel that it has, that it was a good game and that people enjoy it was that because it had that collaboration. And I think that that's where the best ideas come from. I don't think it would have been a great game if they just did it. I don't think it would have been a great game if we just did it. But it's because we were working together on it.
Yeah. So how many business doors open up for you when you just get to drop the idea that, by the way, I directed Metroid Prime? Is everyone like, oh, come on in, sir, right this way, have some water?
Yeah. Well, it's the unfortunate nature of it is that I don't want that to be the thing anymore. It's like, it was fine when we were first starting in the business, when we were first starting Armature, and it did get us in a lot of doors and to talk to a lot of people, and it gave us a lot of opportunities. But we are looking for that thing of, I would like it to be ReCore, or whatever game it would be. Is that I think that, it's such a long time ago, it was so long ago. And I'm fortunate that we were able to be part of something really that people like or do like and are nostalgic about, and that's awesome. And but I think for me it's really that what is the ideal is that it's going to be something that now I could say our studio is has done this, and it's really hard because a lot of it was a good and bad thing that early on in my career that I was a part of something that was popular, or that, no, I don't want to say popular, that was good. We were fortunate to do 3 games in a row that were good, and that's rare. That's really rare. And a lot of companies the top tier companies do a really great job of continuing that quality game after game after game, like Naughty Dog and things like that. But people don't understand how there's thousands and thousands of games that get published a year, and to be singled out and people like that is really tough. It's really, really difficult. So you kind of get used to that, right? You get used to that. Almost a decade of making games, and then you're like, wow, this is gonna be great. Continue making these great games, and then the harsh realities of the world set in terms of like what opportunities are there and how long you have to do them, whatever. So I think that being a part of those things was great, and I would love to be able to continue having our studio, have similar success would be great.
So why'd you leave that safety nest?
Yeah, with anything, it's kind of like my whole career, even before Nintendo, when I was at Iguana, I had worked on only Nintendo hardware for over 10 years. And I really felt that, wow, I would like to try to do something different, not just hardware wise, but there's just other opportunities and other types of games and ideas that we had that I know would never be able to be done here. It just wouldn't. And that's not good or bad. It's just that it wouldn't be possible. So I always wanted to either have my own or be part of a company that I own and try it. And this was the time to do it. The Metroid series was over. We were looking at the next thing we were going to be doing, and it felt like a good time to leave because it would give, there were a lot of talented people who would be able to fill in. It wasn't like necessarily leaving people in the lurch. And I felt that at that point in my career, it was, if I was going to do it, I was going to do it then. We were, myself and my partners were going to try it then. And because you don't know. You always think you're missing out on something, and yeah, there was a certain degree of a safety nest there, but at the same time, um, if you're, I didn't want to be just like I was saying about being comfortable. Like I don't like being comfortable, and I want to always try to. I feel that there's something you're always going to learn from struggling a bit and from trying something new. And by God, owning your own company and doing this stuff from scratch is a learning curve. And we're not business people. The three of us that run the studio are ex-devs, so we're not business savvy, and we had to learn a lot of that stuff. And fortunately, we've been able to hire a lot of great folks to help us out with that. But yeah, I think it was the, I've done this and I can continue doing this, but I really like to try something new.
Yeah, and now you feel like it's paying off. It's been fun here and there, but now you feel like it's really coming together.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, right on. So what do you see as Armature's role in the industry moving forward? Do you want to keep creating new IP? Do you want to be known as the ReCore guys going forward?
Well, we'd be fortunate if we were known as the ReCore guys. That would be great. I really do like the property. I do like the relationships, and I like what we've built. And I think, what is in the game we have right now is like a tenth of the ideas that we had for this world and the characters and everything. So I think there's a lot of meat there to explore. So I think that would be great if that happened. But that's all up to if people like it. But I think that we would like to continue on, doing original things. I mean, I think that that's what we started the company for. And, this is really, truly the first original IP that I've been involved in, like from scratch. Metroid Metroid obviously was a reimagining to some degree, and every other game has been kind of like a reimagining of something else. But this is I like this feeling. Like we did a game earlier in the year called Dead Star, which was original game, and that was a new IP. And there's a lot. Every time we make one, we learn a lot about other mistakes. We make mistakes and we try to improve those. But it's really a great feeling to bad or different. If it's hopefully people view it as a good game and we feel it's good. That it sounds silly, but you've contributed, right? It's like we've contributed to the game industry, and we want to continue making new things. And I would love to continue doing that.
I'd imagine you feel like you're in line with Inafune-san too as well, just being chained by Mega Man for so long, and now for him to finally be like, all right, I just need to make new stuff. I feel like you guys must be kindred spirits over there.
Yeah, it's the good thing is that I like making these types of games. So it's not like it's a punishment that we're getting. Well, the big thing that we learned about having a new company was risk. Is that companies don't want to take risks. They want to know, you've done this type of game before, please make another type of game like that before and make it as successful. That would be great. And that would be great if that happened. And a lot of times you see that developers do make similar types of games because, they might have a particular expertise. And but you always have ideas that completely don't fit that. And I remember in the early days, we would talk about these games like kids games that we felt were really cool and unique, and we would get told when we would pitch these things like, don't you guys make action games? Like that's what you get. It's like the only time it seems like, and sometimes that's the way it goes, is that in order to break out and do sort of a new genre or a new really type of game, you have to kind of self-fund that and really prove to people that you can do it. And there's nothing wrong with that. But that's what you see is like publishers are adverse to risk if it's so outside of what their perceived comfort zone for your skill set as the company is. So I don't feel, it's like I could see how we're maybe pigeonholed into that sort of type of genre of game, which I'm completely fine with because I really enjoy it. But we have a lot of ideas for other types of things, so hopefully we can continue experimenting with that stuff.
Some with zero Metroid elements in there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with Dead Star was the same thing. Like Dead Star was, but it's still an action game, but it's a very different. But yeah, I think that I would love to kind of move on to something like that.
Right on. Well, hey, I'm looking forward to ReCore, man. When's that game coming out?
September 13th. So a few weeks away. we're excited. September 16th, I believe, in Europe. So
Nice.
yeah, it's we're down to the wire down here, and we're super excited. We can't wait for people to check it out.
And now you're in the bracing for impact for the media blast and the tweets coming at you.
That's just I'm old, so no. Yeah, I think that I'm. It's always I went to school for industrial design, and the thing you always never wanted was to make a presentation, and you always had to make you had to come up with a design for something, and then you had to make it in 3D. And back when I went to school in the early 90s, you had to paint it and work on it in a wood shop, so it might be like a ceramic heater or something like that. And you never wanted to show up the day of the presentation with a dripping wet painted model you just finished 20 minutes before, right? And so it's really hard to stand up really proud in front of everybody and propose this, because sometimes people won't take you seriously. But I feel that ReCore we're very proud of it, and we feel that it is not a dripping wet model. It is a solid game that we're proud of, and that we're excited to show to everyone.
Right on. Well, congrats on shipping it up and locking it down there.
Cool. Thanks so much.
Yeah, and thank you for your time, and thank you for watching or listening to this episode of the Game Informer Show. Be sure to tune in next Thursday, and we'll have a new episode waiting for you. Bye, everybody.